Five, four, three, two, one.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. So, I mean, I take it you guys think that's the case too? I don't know Chris Williamson. Yeah. Yeah. Look, I'll cut to it, right? Yeah, yeah, it has. It obviously has. And let's be real, it's a top-down deep state operation that started from the cabal and filtered through all of its various little arms, and then eventually it contacts the general public through the corporatocracy, which they own through all their banking scam. Because that's what they've been doing the last like 100 years, and since they started that, they bought everything up, and now they use all these corporations to inculcate their shitty satanic ideas into people. Am I allowed to say shitty and satanic on YouTube? I forget
Yes,
what
yeah,
their censorship
I
is.
think so. But you never know who from the cabal is listening. So,
Yeah.
so we'll see what happens.
Sorry, Mr. Rockefeller. They actually there's a Rockefeller bit of land on the other side of Avebury where I'm staying at the moment, like in Pusey Vale. They got this like cursed pyramid on it. To finish that previous point, right? Like they got the intelligence agencies and the mainstream media and all that kind of stuff, and they've inculcated this a bunch of ideas through like that. And one of them is to undermine men in all these different ways. And I think you can actually sum up the theme of how they're undermining the men as like the Oedipal mother. So we've got this like Oedipal mother relationship with the state, but by proxy the deep state. And actually, having listened a lot to, because we were talking off camera a little bit about Cliff High, who I'm really fond of. I think he's a really cool like conspiracy guy. I think there's a lot of Munchausen's by proxy as well. I think he does a pretty good argument of explaining that the state is doing the Munchausen's by proxy. So yes, we do have a crisis of masculinity, and the reason is if our men are weak, wussy, dependent, hypersexualized, not responsible, ignorant, and just pathetic, then when you're doing a global worldwide sort of like neo-communist takeover, it's a lot easy compared to having like lots of strong, stoic, hardcore men that can autistically put like a 40-kilogram backpack on and run over mountains for 3 days in a row. You don't want a bunch of them. You want a bunch of confused retards, and we have a chunk of those, unfortunately.
Is that what masculinity is? Like backpacks? Because I think it'd be good to just define that, and then if we have an idea of, you know, the title of the podcast was making masculinity great again, what's the benchmark by which we measure that? Is it chivalrous knights of old?
Yeah, I mean, like, so it's nebulous, right? And it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But I think there are objective truths in the inner, just like there are objective truths in the manifested world. So, like, you know, no matter what anyone's opinion is iron, or like the weak nuclear force is the weak nuclear force. So too, I think there are objective facts in, you know, the psyche and the spirit. And I think so if we're trying to grapple with what masculinity is, I think we should try to grapple at that archetypal level, which I understand is an objective fact. And I think what it is masculine energy is dominant in the manifested world, whereas like femininity is more dominant in the first stage of the inner planes, which is why, like, you know, traditionally we kneel to women, because, like, you know, especially people like knights, like chivalrous people like the Knights Templar, for example, because you know, you being lord of the manifested world kneel to something which is superior, because the spiritual forces are superior to the manifested. So it's the active principle, rather than so an active principle psycho spiritually would be like, I don't know, like logic, abstraction, like kind of acute uses of the psyche, whereas, like, to contrast that, the more feminine principles are states of being. So, like, you know, forgiveness, for example, it's not an acute application of the psyche or the spirit, it's a being, which always confused me actually for years in my life coaching practice, because I was like, how the fuck do you forgive? And it's like, it's the wrong question, like, because it's a beingness. Same with sensuality, which is where a lot of men, me definitely included, get sensuality wrong, because we try to break it down in terms of these like acute things, and it's not. It's a field. It's being. You know, the Venetian spirit of our psyche is there. So I think, like, I've given you a few ideas there. So to underline that, it's dominance in the manifested world. It's the acute part of the psyche. It's the active principle as opposed to the receptive field that the active principle moves into. I think archetypally it's summed up like as one of you guys said, like as like nobility, chivalry, that kind of thing. But what do you make of all that, guys?
That rings true to anyone who does any sort of esoteric research or symbolism research. You think of masculine being the active principle and feminine being the passive.
Mm-hmm.
And so, say the chalice, for example, that's a feminine symbol because it's the receptacle. And it comes from biology at the end of the day. This is how we procreate. There is an active participant and a passive is, we're using this in terms that you wouldn't use in interpersonal relationships, as a, you know, but that's how the system works. You have an active and a passive coming together, which creates a new life out of it.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And people have known this for thousands of years.
Yeah. Yeah, but why do you think we're gaslighting everyone out of that? And like the conversation we're having there is a little taboo, isn't it? And it's like, if you were saying that to a bunch of normies, you can imagine the defensiveness that might happen.
I think I'm a normie.
Well, something's gone wrong, isn't it? We're being hijacked, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Culturally, we're being hijacked. And so we have these concepts like toxic masculinity now. So the things that you've suggested would make would be a paradigm of masculinity are seen as negative things now, things that should be avoided, shunned, shamed.
Yeah, because the Cabal, like Scar from the Lion King, which archetypally they are, so they behave very true to that archetypal form, are afraid of the big, frightening alpha male lion, and so they spend a lot of their propaganda points, which are limited and precious to them, gaslighting and sort of undermining the things they are most afraid of, and one of them is true masculinity. They can't handle it, and so they have to deal with it through indirect means, not head on, like poisoning, undermining various different spiritual forces, gossip, things. And this would work for an individual kind of play out of this dynamic, just as it does like in the whole, big world of like, us and the Cabal and that kind of thing.
So Scar, that's a good example. I mean, that's like there's a polar relationship there, isn't there, between Scar and Mufasa? So this is like you've got the positive and the dark side of masculinity there, haven't you? Represented in the two brothers in that character.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's such a good insight. Like, what made you bring that idea up?
It just came to me then. I was coughing. I thought one of these two might speak, and they didn't. So I just went, Scar.
Right.
He's evil, right?
Yeah, okay, so like the cool thing about that is like it's a shadow, right? And this applies to all of us going through this great awakening process right now. Like Mufasa, who's the dad, and Simba is like the young one, right? So Simba needs Scar. He needs him because that's his shadow material projected out into the manifested world. Without Scar, he'd stay as a retard like the whole of his life. Whereas by Scar like challenging him on his weaknesses, he either gets destroyed by it and enslaved, which has happened to a lot of people down here at this point, or you overcome. And you always have a choice. If you read like Man's Search for Meaning, for example, like that Viktor Frankl book about the concentration camps, like the thing he says in that book is like, look, you've always got a choice. You can always choose your perspective, and you can always choose your actions, even in a freaking concentration camp. And one of the things you, me, anyone listening to this may choose to do is to choose to overcome the Scar or the New World Order or like the various narcissistic abusers in our life. And if we overcome them, then the weaknesses that they expose us on get fixed. They get fixed spiritually, they get fixed in the psyche, and then they get fixed in the manifested world, which all that stuff eventually goes to. And so what this is in this great awakening and great reset time is one gigantic shadow material test, just like the Lion King, just like that great narrative, that hero's journey thing, where the Cabal plays our own shadow material to an extreme level. And it's only in this really weird environment where we have such an extreme energy, where should enough of us choose to overcome it rather than succumb and be enslaved, then a propulsion, psycho-spiritual propulsion takes place, where we get to open up some really cool faculties of the psyche, which have been largely closed for, well, I reckon about 12,000 years or so.
So sorry, in terms of like the psyche then, what do you mean by certain facets of the psyche have been closed for 12,000 years? Can you?
Well, like, was it you that like picked up like the esoteric stuff I was talking about earlier?
I know a little bit. I mean, I've read one Carl Jung book, so The Archetypes, but that's about it really in terms of my sort of knowledge, I would say. And a lot of that was, that was the first one I'd read. I think I tried to read one about religion, but it just seemed like one long sentence, so I gave up with that one and started with this one, which was mildly easier to understand. But yeah, I don't know. I can't remember what I said to you, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I just like, well, I mean, what you're saying about Carl Jung, he's really hard to read. And I think anyone listening to this that's interested in getting into Jung, the way to do it is read a good book or a few good books that are written about him by someone else. And then you're ready to tackle him. So the best way I did it is with Murray Stein's Jung's Map of the Soul. So if anyone's interested, he's the best way into Jung that I found. But I mean, like most of us are using like a tiny little fraction of what our psyches and our spirit, which is one big continuum, right? So like the spooky stuff that might happen if one of us took way too much LSD or something and had this like paradoxical experience where we merged with the whole universe or something like that. Like that's still, I mean, pretty much anyone could do that, you know, today if you wanted to. But like that's part of the same continuum that goes to like, you know, what the sort of vanilla thinking that most Western psychologists might represent, or like an emotion that like maybe an artist would have a high resolution grappling with or something like that. And equally then that continues to the manifested world, but like, you know, like a physicist would understand. So what I'm suggesting is that part of actually a very key central foundation part of the matrix, the great conspiracy that we're in, is that we've been locked in the manifested world, that all of our attention has gone progressively over many years away from these higher aspects of spirit, and then the higher like aspects of psyche. And now like you get your average materialist reductionist person that thinks that like all they are is their body, and their brain is where the thinking happens, and consciousness, if it even exists at all, is some quaint epiphenomenon of the brain. Whereas like, you know, I think a more fuller understanding of things is like the manifested world is at most, and I do mean at most, like 10%, it's probably not even 1%, to be honest, of this much vaster reality that exists in all these inner planes. And if we can open up to that through the, you know, the Great Awakening and the stuff I was talking about a bit earlier, then the coolest things happen. And the one of the main cool things that happens, guys, is like that anxiety, that depression, that like living death in that boring slave clown world that everyone seems to be freaking living in, where up is down and good is evil, and these absurdities just running around everywhere. That ends, and a fullness and a sense of life and like just fun and magic and joy floods into you, and it doesn't just stop there. Like it goes way further. So that's what's on the table.
Do we just have to drop acid and watch The Lion King then? I mean,
there's a bit more to it than that, Ben, I'm afraid.
I think you could get some tentative results from that.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'm out.
So it sounds like, would this correlate to Carl Jung's concept of individuation?
It's exactly that, but it's hard to understand it, I think, when you read the stuff.
No shit. Yeah. I mean,
but it is, yeah.
The way I'm very much, I've only read one book. Well, I've got about 30 pages left, and it's the same one you read about, you lent me, about Carl Jung. And sort of the way I understand it is you're trying to make yourself whole. You're trying to make your psyche whole again. So we have this ego, this sort of conscious personality that we, with all our thoughts and feelings encompassed with it, that we have during our waking lives. And then we have this other sort of great unknown psyche that exists unconsciously or subconsciously, which has a great deal of effect on how we operate, which I've learned doing this podcast with various guests like Jahan Satori. Talks a lot about unconscious and how it can influence us. And it's about not trying to destroy that part of the psyche or ignore it or put it in a box and not let it affect you, but trying to integrate it into your conscious being so that you're a whole, you're an individual. And that's why he calls it individuation. Would you say that's relatively accurate, or could you expand on it?
Yeah. Well, I think you very beautifully explained like the kind of textbook definition of it, and I would agree with the denotations of what you say there, but the connotations I would respectfully push back on, because it's the connotation, the spirit that you express that with is like, it's kind of like a Western psychology thing, where it's like, oh yeah, and you get your subconscious all dialed in about, and it's optimized, and you're much happier, and things are good. It's like, yeah, maybe. Well, it will, but actually, like, if you really understand what the subconscious is, and what the inner planes are, and what it means to understand like the relationship between inner and outer, and like, you know, and all that kind of stuff, it is a lot more than just, you know, like doing your business a bit better or having a better relationship with your wife or something. It's infinitely vaster than that. It's the spirit, I think, is understood better when you think of Jung as like an alchemist, you know, like maybe a lot of people don't know that, like, that he went through this alchemical transformation, which is the same as a Gnostic sort of awakening transformation, whatever you want to call it. And then he read these books like from the Chinese alchemists afterwards, and he was like, oh wow, these people had the same thing happen to them that happened to me. So he had that validation from this other school from it. So I think if you think of him as like a Gnostic or an alchemist, whilst I definitely agree with the denotations of what you're saying there, the spirit of what he did and what he's trying to communicate comes through. So he's not a psychologist like the West, like we people always sanitize these great geniuses. Neither is Newton a physicist; he was an occultist. Or neither was Pythagoras a triangle dude. He was like a mega, like a mystery school teacher. And Jung wasn't a psychotherapist. Like the guy was a Gnostic or an alchemist. He was one of the great Gnostic prophets of our time, actually.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sort of I'm only just dipping my feet into Carl Jung, but I was kind of intimidated, to be honest. I've been reading esoteric stuff and whatnot for quite a few years now, and if you talk to people who are involved in theosophy or occult subjects, they hold him in such a high regard as being this sort of he's put on a pedestal. Everyone talks about Carl Jung or is influenced by Carl Jung, and so I found it quite intimidating to start, because I was like, what if I don't get it? What if I'm just a bit thick and I won't understand it and stuff? What if I'm not prepared? And so I'm glad I dipped my feet in. I think I picked up quite a lot. I understood more than I maybe thought I would do. But there is still, for anyone going in cold, I think you would really struggle. I mean, there is some really obscure references in there. I
mean, it's the breadth.
Breadth of his reading?
It is reading into
incredible,
into myth and legend, and he all incorporates it all into this. His kind of theory or whatever. His worldview of the psyche, essentially. One of the really interesting things was towards the end, if you're reading about the mandalas. And he's just got like pages and pages of mandalas in that book, where he kind of considers that as a way that people fix I can't remember the term, but basically bring the psyche back together, essentially, when it's been broken, to aid recovery, essentially. And he found, he says, I have no reason to not believe him, that basically all of these mandalas that he found, that put in the book, were spontaneously produced by loads of patients across like 20 years or something, in various asylums and stuff. And all of them have esoteric sort of symbolism all the way through them. It's crazy. And you can see it from, and he sort of maps them to like Tibetan drawings and things like that. And they're being spontaneously produced, basically. So that points, I don't know, it points to something, whether that's like an in-out kind of thing, that people kind of absorb this stuff unconsciously from religion and all the different sources of information, or whether that's, like he says, that's within, that's unconscious, that's the archetype coming out. I don't know, but yeah, it's certainly interesting.
Well, I mean, my lived experience and theoretical research and practice into this stuff is it's definitely like it's an archetype bubbling up through the inner planes, expressing it, just like Carl Jung thought. I mean, it's the same thing that like anyone familiar with like Joseph Campbell might see when some like random Inuit tribe that's been disconnected from everyone for like 10,000 years has the same sort of narratives and sort of like story archetypes in their myths and legends. And it's like, oh yeah, but maybe it's the same flood. And it's, yeah, maybe, but like probably not, right? Like it doesn't really fit properly because they don't have the same historical records. It fits perfectly though to understand the bubbling up of these archetypes through the inner planes. And actually, like I'm confident enough to say, like maybe one of you three, or certainly someone in our audience would experience this, where like either through like some sort of active imagination process, like what Carl Jung was doing, where he's just sketching and just sketches out these random mandalas. He's like, why am I drawing another mandala? Could have drawn anything, I did another mandala. Why? Or like you see it in your dreams, or maybe you see it in your vision, or something like that. Like people in this audience would notice these things, and then you look the symbol up, and you're like, well, I didn't know about that, but it turns out this big symbol which has been around for thousands of years and stuff, because these symbols get close to that archetypal world, which speaks to us through those vehicles that we just talked about there.
Yeah, it's just a real strange phenomenon, I would say, definitely. and one that's really hard to I suppose ignore, and to not say that it's perhaps coming, I'd like to believe that we all have this kind of genetically or whatever, it's passed down through us, through our biology. But it's quite a tricky thing, I suppose, to actually say for certain, I guess.
For materialists, it would be, definitely. But that's the prison that we're in, you see.
No, yeah, definitely, I would agree.
Going back to masculinity, because we sort of deviated to Jung. So tenets of being a good, exemplar of masculinity. I'm thinking like someone like Jordan Peterson would talk about responsibility as being a primary factor. Would you be on that sort of stream as well?
Yeah, I think so. Like, what do you guys think responsibility has to do with masculinity?
I think there's different levels to responsibility. So there are sort of physical responsibilities. If you're a parent, you have physical responsibilities to your wife or partner and children. I'm probably sound like a dinosaur and rather unfashionable now, but your primary role is to protect your family physically. Yeah. And then there are the sort of hierarchy of needs. Who's that guy? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you want to provide shelter for your family and a comfortable life, maybe not too comfortable, because then you end up with these slush fund kids, and they turn out a complete mess because they've had everything done for them. And so yes, there is hardship is required to develop a person, but there's sort of physical, sort of boring responsibilities. I think you got to be responsible for your own actions. That's and your own behavior. I think that's very important to be a masculine man. Hold yourself accountable for what you do and say.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you demonstrate that? And
I don't fucking.
Well, the thing that came to my mind while you were talking then is, the ability to, like you said, recognize when you've done something wrong and apologize, basically.
Yes, that's something a lot of us struggle with. But we all know when we've done it, because you feel it. You feel it in your heart, if presume you have one. When you overreact because your kids are winding you up and you raise your voice, when you had that split second to make a decision. Are you going to overreact? For what? For your own psychic benefit, not to benefit anyone else. You're doing it for yourself, for your own, some sort of dark thing that goes on in your head that makes you want to lash out because it'll make you feel better for a split second.
Yeah, when you get to our age, Richard, you have a litany of mistakes you can look back on and learn from.
I've got plenty of mistakes, but no, I mean, like I deeply understand that like sadistic impulse that we all have, and like to the degree to which we don't take responsibility for ourselves. Like not only do we make tons of chaos in the world, but by our being and thoughts and emotions, our own psyche starts to get retarded. And one of the ways it retards itself is you start to sustain yourself from the like the sadistic impulse. So you go far enough from that and you can really enjoy that, and like I've coached people that are very far gone on this kind of thing, like narcissism, psychopathy, that sort of thing. And like the biggest prize to those people is like just to take someone that's shining, just glowing and good, and just like maybe over a long period of time, like over a month or two, and then just like crush what is good and break their heart and destroy them. And it's a very prized kick that people like that would feel. So it's remarkably common. And a lot of people, one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up is a lot of people that actually don't realize that that's the case. But because like with the cabal, like I find that when I'm respectfully talking to people that are like a layer or two into the conspiracy thing and they're working it out, they tend to ascribe like their motivations to greed. Oh yeah, it's all about money. It's not, man. These clowns have already got all the money and all the stuff. The goals they have are psycho-spiritual in the way that I was explaining sadism there, and then overtly spiritual into a formalized religion. And because actually, like, when they do their get woke, go broke and all that, they lose their money, but it's actually useful for the kind of the big project, the big psycho-spiritual project they have with their like slave system, but also for the type of sadism that Phil was talking about there a little bit.
Is not part of it the kind of personalities that get into the positions at the, you know, the top 0.1%, you know, people who run the IMF or the EU or some big multinational? Is there a component there?
Yeah, well, like so there's two things. There's like what the club, the cabal, selects for, and being a satanic organization that selects for the sort of traits that you might imagine a satanic one does, which is the inversion of good. But also like in these big centralized power structures, let's just say what you got one that wasn't, you know, overtly controlled by the cabal. Yeah, like in a lot of ways, it selects for like things like narcissism and Machiavellianism and that kind of thing. The way it's set up, like I don't know if anyone's done like office jobs and stuff like that, but like in a way, the game is set up to favor people that play politics or like talk out both sides of their mouth, or like are good emotional manipulators and not sincere, or like, to use game theory language, like play the defect strategy but do it with a smile on your face. I think a lot of those centralized systems in our culture right now are kind of set up to favor that thing. So I think through both of those mechanisms, either the cabal wants you because you're a, you know, like a pedophile, like, you know, sadist or something, which is literally the case, or if you're just like a low-key evil person that's sort of like not only adapted to these awful systems but like incentivize them, because if you're too consumed by all this like corruption of the soul, right, there is one thing that these clowns want every day, and that is you need the superior position, need it like a junkie needs heroin or whatever, and you are terrified of the inferior position, because absent of a stronger psycho-spiritual energy source, you have to rely on this persona game, where the persona, this like kind of contrived, fragmented bit of the psyche that you kind of affiliate yourself with, needs that superiority. And if it shatters, like you have this like sort of like psycho-spiritual death thing, and then you know that's happening because they go into this Joffrey like rage. So if your incentives are like that, then one of the best places you could think of go would be like to climb a corporation, because you might get close to the top and then you're special, you're superior, and that you know, if your psyche is built that way, there's a big kind of quote unquote reward for that.
I'm just wondering, you know, is there a place then how you can, I suppose, survive in the system that we have, you know, whilst trying to I don't know, incorporate your kind of psyche into this, you know, reach those higher planes, or however you want to kind of phrase it, the process of individuation, that kind of thing. How would you go about that, living in a system that's set up like that, essentially?
Man, that's such a good question. Well, that's what all of us here are doing right now. You know, that's our big challenge. And that's what we're here doing. And like, you know, that's what my life coaching practice is all about. I didn't actually know it would be about this when I started out, but I know for sure now it is. It's to do exactly what you said there. And like, oh, well, I mean, there's a long answer to that. I mean, how have you guys done it so far?
Yeah, just keep it on the QT.
Yeah,
I think I've changed quite a lot over the last maybe 10 or 15 years. So for an example, 10 or 15 years ago, my weekends revolved around football. So I would get up Saturday morning, I'd put Jeff on Sky Sports News or whatever the fuck it was. And then, 12 o'clock, time for Football Focus, BBC One. Watch that for an hour. All right, it's nearly time to go to the match. We'll have a pint in the pub first and watch the match live at 3 o'clock. Come home, maybe have a pint on the way home at 6. And so from like 9 in the morning till 6 at night on every Saturday or every other Saturday, and Tuesday night football and Sundays matches. You know, my life was consumed, particularly my weekends.
What a smooth brain
with football. And I just came to the conclusion, I don't know what the trigger was, that this is a fucking joke and a waste of time. And I've not been on a football match for well over a decade. I don't watch any football now. I've sort of moved on to other media, so I don't watch TV anymore. I very rarely watch any films. Music I don't listen to anymore, very rarely. So, yeah, I think maybe the media you consume can help you, or lack thereof, to sort of, like Matt was saying, how you navigate the system. Maybe not waste so much time on meaningless shit. I think the biggest realization I had when I had kids was that the only thing that's truly the only thing that we have that's truly limited is time. We only get so much of it, and we don't know how much we have. And I'm not prepared to waste my time on meaningless shit anymore.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the,
to a
the
degree.
really
I do still play
Caveat.
video games, but it's one night for 2 hours a week, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
Maybe
Oh man, I love a computer game. They're so freaking addictive, but I love them so much.
Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say, Richard?
No, it's cool, man. I mean, it's a valid point. Like, I was gonna say that, like that's one of the ways that the two civilizations is divided, right? Like, one is meaningless and like contrived, and the other one is real and full of meaning. And the meaningness and the realness is the antidote to the insanity that most people have faced.
Well, it's like I can't believe it. You brought up Viktor Frankl, which is probably the most impactful book I've ever read. I mentioned it when I did 13 questions. One of the 13 questions was, what's the most influential book you ever read? And I was straight on to Viktor Frankl because it's kind of harrowing, if I can say the word properly. And it's similar to the Gulag Archipelago in the way it highlights how vulnerable we are, and how it doesn't take much to lead people to do things that are heinous and unconscionable. Yeah,
that was interesting because I've said this when I did the very same podcast, didn't I? After you, and I spoke about your interpretation. I know you probably had different interpretations of it, but you mentioned, Richard, perhaps what I took away from that book was more that despite his circumstances, and, you know, his idea to me was, you know, that despite any kind of circumstances that you can go through, you can decide to either act in line with your own values, or you can kind of give up, essentially. That's the difference, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement. Beautifully expressed. Yeah, that's the message. Yes.
I would say, but you could spin it the way that you kind of said, because, you know,
I think we're saying the same thing.
I suppose.
Yeah, they are the same thing.
The point is that you have a choice, and it comes back to what we were saying before about being accountable and being responsible for your own actions. And so you have a choice in how you behave.
Well, like take the scamdemic. Like, I mean, we're talking about concentration camp guards and stuff like that. We all learn how many people can, perhaps ourselves, can become concentration camp guards when the conditions are right from that episode.
Yeah, people snitching on the neighbours for having parties and stuff.
Doing that retarded clap like it's North Korea on Thursdays. Remember that?
Hey,
yeah.
I work in the NHS and I enjoyed every single clap.
But the social conditioning part is really interesting because a lot of people did it for social. They didn't want. They wondered what will my neighbours think of me if they don't see me clapping on my porch.
It wasn't because they wanted. You know, there was conversations in my household around doing it, and it was we. You know, me and my wife was kind of saying like, we both don't want to do this. It's absolutely pointless. But, you know, you had that social pressure to do it because like the neighbours were out doing it. And I think it thankfully down our street, I think it lasted only a few days before.
About 4 doors down from us, there's a little old lady who used to come out, and she used to come to Endett Drive. And she'd be looking like this and looking down street to see who was out and who wasn't.
But the other thing as well, I suppose, you know, a little old lady, perhaps that was her only contact, maybe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't know. But anyway, we're going off a little bit off piste there. And I don't even know what we were talking about.
It's on point. But like so there's that side of things, but there's also like if you, there's a certain, we're on YouTube, so we've got to use euphemisms. So like there's a certain well-known medical treatment, right? And everyone's like, oh, I have to have it. It's like, no, you don't. Yeah, but I'll lose my job, or I can't go on holiday, or I can't, or everyone's going to think I'm a weirdo or whatever. It's like, yeah, but you don't have to. like you're pressured to. There's social pressure, there's spiritual pressure in some cases, there's all sorts of weird economic pressures and stuff like that, but you don't have to. And that's the same thing that Viktor Frankl was getting on, man. Like if you have a conviction that you didn't want to do it, you didn't do it. But if you gave in to the economic pressures or the social pressures or enough of them anyway, then it got you, you know.
Yeah, it was Jordan Peterson again talking about crossing that line.
Yeah,
in a famous interview, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he sort of broached it in psychological terms that by coercing people to accept the magic juice into their life when they didn't want to, you were sort of being psychologically bashed with each dose that you were administered with.
You were, yes.
Yeah, and I guess that's why. I mean, well, I will just say, go to Richard's website. Links in the show notes, because there's a special section on this subject for counselling with people who maybe have regret in this regard. And yeah, but it's a dangerous topic. I don't want to get this whole thing chucked off YouTube just over, one topic. But
Thanks for the plug.
Oh yeah, it's always there. Links in the show notes as always, and it's on the screen as well. I'll tell you what, you mentioned Stoicism earlier. Now, is this a component of masculinity? And also, broadening it a bit, thinking back to the old Romans, they were very fond of the concept of virtues. Certain things are virtuous, and this is another old-fashioned thing that we don't talk about anymore.
Yeah, well, I think they got robbed from our parents' generation, right? I think they I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but like our parents kind of had them, but they didn't know why. They kind of knew you should tell the truth, and they knew that you should have responsibility and all that, but they didn't know why. So then when we all like rebelled and didn't do it, and we're like, well, why should I tell the truth, or why should I, like take responsibility or whatever? They're like, well, you just should, all right. And then so then our generation's like, well, there's no good reason not to, so I won't. And then we run this great experiment of what happens when you just let everything fly, and we find out what kind of results you get. And what happens is that because we're spiritual beings, right? So you don't just get to do whatever you want to do in isolation, right? Everything's recorded, and there's an unbelievably complex, all-encompassing impact to like every thought and emotion and a deeper ripple of our psyche that you have, and it's actually soul crushing it when you really think about it. So like when you do stuff that's in absence of virtue, a retardation process happens. And the confusing thing is, it doesn't initially, or maybe ever really, but certainly initially happen in the manifested world. So a materialist culture can't really understand it, but we become corrupted. And then we have all these weird knock-on effects happening in the world, somewhat by causality, mostly by synchronicity, which again is a hard concept for a materialist concept to happen. But to put it simply, like just shit seems to come. Whereas like if you dial in on the virtues, like you tell your truth, you clean your room, as the great Jordan Peterson says. Like you develop strength, you develop like compassion, you develop charity, you develop good boundaries. I can't tell you how many freaking hundreds of hours of coaching I've spent helping everyone with that. Then not only does your own life improve, both in direct causal ways, but also in synchronistic ways, but like a field around you, things tend to get better. And like one of the good things about like living in a satanic clown world on the edge of a like a global dystopian nightmare, it's like when you're a bit tempted to like give in to the, or at least I feel this way, when I'm tempted to give in to the darker parts of my character, just think, oh, I wonder what would happen if I did this, and maybe I should just backslide on this for a few months and see what happens. Like the computer games, for example, like they're fantastic, but they bring out the worst in me. There's this little voice in my head saying, look, Rich, if you slip, if you let off for a little bit, man, these guys, they're gonna come for you, they're gonna do you in, or they're gonna grow unchecked. So I find that the virtues are for us fundamentally. They're there for our own strength and benefit primarily. But if we don't get them dialed in enough, the enemy, the cabal, is going to proliferate, and the worst possible outcome imaginable will happen for a time here if we don't.
Trying to think what the worst possible outcome I can imagine is. Well,
like microchips, forced private medical treatments for everyone, cashless society. Every minute little thing that you do, plus a ton of things you don't even know, is tracked, run by the worst possible psychopathic monsters, plugged into a spiritual force that's even worse than they are, running everything from a centralized position. Something like that.
Good summary.
Yeah, excellent summary. Yeah, terrifying.
Yeah,
but you know, we can't control what happens sort of outside of our sphere of influence. I like how you describe it's almost like a ripple effect, that when you change your behavior, it sort of ripples out around you. This is a concept that a lot of people who maybe don't listen to podcasts like this aren't cognizant of, is that how your behavior affects other people continuously and for all time, forever. It's like, I'm not going Akashic Records sort of territory here. I'm sort of a bit not sure how I feel about that. But just on a physical and societal level, it is obvious the way you affect ripples through humanity and history for the rest of time. So you better start taking notice of it.
Do you ever have it when like you go in a room, right, and for whatever reason you've got this real loving energy in you today, like maybe your training's good, you've done some saunaing, or like you've done some good work, right, and you've got that loving, glowing, confident, effortlessly confident energy. You don't even need to say anything, man. You lift the room up with that stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's almost oh my gosh, yeah. Whether it's sort of, I don't know if it's like unconscious cues that people are picking up, or an emotional intelligence cues or something, but you can tell. I mean, it's the same. It goes the other way as well with negative energy, doesn't it? When someone walks into a room and you just get this vibe about that person, like something's not right, you know?
Yeah, and a lot of that's the beginnings of how a lot of left-hand path sorcery works. It's that, but just like sort of practiced, and then sort of like with this acute kind of purposeful, ego-driven aim to it. But it's not. It is non-verbal and it is physical, but it's not. It's telepathic, and not merely for the surface part of our psyche. There's other parts of the psyche that also sort of connect to it, like you know, like grass in a field. Like they're all part of the same soil, you know. So like if there's wetness in this bit of the soil, it sort of spreads generally to a general area. It's a bit like that.
Yeah. We didn't really talk about Stoicism. We sort of skipped over that. How would you sort of how do you implement Stoicism sort of on a day-to-day basis?
Well, like I think one of the great things about Stoicism is like the classic books on it, which are about 2,000 years old. A lot of them are really, really good. And it doesn't matter where you are in your personal development journey. Like you could be like an 11-year-old or someone that's starting this stuff when you're 30, or educated, not educated. It doesn't really matter. You pick up like Marcus Aurelius or Seneca. I think there's 4 big ones from like that time period. You pick them up, you read it, and it's infinitely relatable. There's also a couple of really good Stoic books that have been written these days. Do you know the guy that wrote The Obstacle is the Way? Anyone know him?
No, I don't.
No.
Well, that's a good book. It's a modern guy that wrote some modern takes on Stoicism, and that book's really good. And there's another book. I forget the name. Irvin is the guy's name. It's the philosopher that wrote it. But like again, for some reason with Stoicism, like it missed that like crap English thing where they have to like when you could say something with 4 words and instead you use like 40, you know, and you use all these like fancy words instead of saying really simple words. So they use really simple words. It's really clean, and like there's something there for everyone at whatever stage of personal development you're on. So start with those brilliant books. And then understand why they're saying it. Like it's there for your benefit, and then the betterment of your family, or even just perfect strangers that are all around you. And then do it. And then the cool thing about this age, guys, is that there's so much suffering. There is so much sadness. There's so much disorder. There's so much anxiety and depression and malaise and ugly architecture and meaninglessness all around. And the cool thing about all that stuff is a catalyst. The job of evil is a catalyst to wake up sleeping consciousness that's degraded too far. It's literally the purpose of it. So like people are suffering hard these days. you know, and so there's an impetus to read Stoicism and stuff like that. So perhaps it's good to know there's things like that there available, where if you're hurting enough and you're like, look, I'm in such pain, I don't care, what can I do to make this better? All right, you can read a book on Stoicism and see what Seneca thinks about living a more full, noble life.
Yeah, I mean, I know he's starting to go out of fashion now, Jordan Peterson, but I don't think you can underestimate the effect he had when it comes to finding meaning in life, the lessons he's been talking about. And I think it's telling that he has such a following in young men. And I know, you know, the lefties think, well, that's because they're all incels or, you know, I don't know, the gaming, misogynists and all that. But no, the young lads who are struggling to find meaning in their lives, and he's offering some pretty straightforward, old school lessons about how to derive meaning in your life. Love him or hate him, I think his cultural impact is pretty huge, has been pretty huge.
Couldn't agree more. I think the man is a freaking angel. And I think the reason he's been maligned and his audience have been misrepresented so deliberately and so consistently is because it freaking works, what he had to say. And the lessons are great. And if you do them, if you pick up the things he's telling you, they bloody work. Where I would respectfully push back a little bit on Peterson is, like, he'll take you so far, and it's very far and very needed and noble, and like, look, if I could do a teeny weeny little fraction of the good that guy has done for this planet, I will end this life feeling very, very happy, right? Because the man's an angel. Done. That said, he is not woo enough, as Cliff High would say, right? Like, we were talking a little bit off air about this before this started. Like, you won't hear Jordan Peterson talk about crop circles. You won't hear him talk about aliens. You won't hear him talk about, like, the weirder Gnostic stuff that Carl Jung was up to. You won't hear him talk about, like, I don't know, man, like the cabal and the satanic ritual abuse those guys are up to, and on and on and on, right? But the thing is, our actual reality is actually made of that stuff. And actually, the reason why the crop circles and the satanic ritual abuse and the weirder end of cryptocurrency and all this sort of stuff is maligned is because that's where the bleeding edge of the action is, you know, and it's one of the greatest maps that there is to navigate this satanic clown world we're all in. Is just find the thing that is the most maligned, most out there, that you're definitely prohibited by the mainstream from saying, go there, and that is where you find the most meaning. And so I think, you know, like, Jordan Peterson does a great job within that big framework that he's in, but there's a crucial missing bit at the end. And should you want to navigate this ridiculous, powerful time in history that we're in, you need the aliens. You need the satanic ritual abuse of and the sorcery that those guys are up to. You need to understand what the cabal's about. You need to understand about Gnosticism and forbidden history and what was going on in Atlantis and all that kind of stuff. Because if you don't have that, you've got missing bits of the map, and you're not going to be accurate. And, you know, poor old Peterson, with great respect to that venerable man, was taken in by all the psyops and stuff at the beginning of the you know, the operation, and he took a certain medical procedure as well.
Richard, do you not think it's a shrewd move by Peterson to not be so woo, because he does want to be a successful author and actually sell some books to the people?
Yeah, I mean, like, you could make that case. I would say you're sacrificing the greater for the lesser if you do that. And the people, me and my colleagues, I don't know, maybe you'd be different. I'd be curious to know. Like, but the people we respect the most are the ones that, like, relentlessly just say, like, forget the books, forget the message, forget how it's perceived. Just what's the truth? What's the truth? What's the truth? Graham Hancock springs to mind. Like, I love that man. And I think the reason why
Have you got the?
We got a sound clip from last week. Sorry,
that's an inside joke from our guest last week.
Tune in for part 2.
Yeah, tune in for part 2.
So do you actually like Graham Hancock?
Very much so.
Yeah,
yes.
I've read his books.
Yeah, I've read a lot of his books. I'm with him. I'm not with him 100% of the way. I'm sort of skeptical of the New Age stuff. Just through other books that I've read. Going back, Carl Jung, you know, is skeptical of the New Age stuff. when he's talking about there are certain Gnostic ideas and other ideas about unity, about us being like a shard of light, a shard of consciousness, and we need to reunite with the whole. And Carl Jung makes the point that this is almost sort of giving way to the unconscious. And that's why he sort of hammers on this point that it's about integration. It's not about releasing the consciousness and becoming part of this greater whole, this, what's he call it, the collective unconscious. That would be a big no-no. It's about integrating and stuff. So, yeah, I'm very skeptical about the New Age stuff and all the Gaia stuff and all that. And Hancock seems to be one of the biggest or most successful mouthpieces, I would say.
Oh, there's so much to unpack there. I think in broad strokes, I agree with you. Like the new, because the New Age means a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
So the age of Aquarius and the awakening of this new Gnostic paradigm, 1,000,000% behind that and with that. But like you know, like the New Age is like where it's like a flower of life shirt and like all these like cheap like spiritual cliches and like kind of like spiritual narcissism, where like instead of getting a Ferrari or getting like a big Instagram account, you're sort of like showing people how spiritual you are as a way to prop up your fragmented psyche.
Spiritual virtual signaling.
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
That's what it is.
Hemp trousers are cheaper than a Ferrari.
It's a lot cheaper than the Ferrari, but it's the same thing. Or like I stand with Ukraine, or what? I don't know if we'll get kicked off of YouTube for saying that, but fuck it. Like it's
Go on.
But yeah. So that's horseshit, and also a lot of that, like that, some of the spiritual stuff they do get into. I mean, some of it's good, and some of it's just a big nothing burger, and some of it's dangerous. Like I think can and does fuck your psyche up. Because that's the danger of spiritual work. Like if you're a carpenter and you're learning how to make shelves and you make some shit shelves, you throw it away and try again for the next bit. But if you're trying to reorganize your psyche and you fuck up, it's going to cause a lot of problems. So so there's a lot of that in the New Age too.
Yeah, and there are globalist claws within the New Age movement.
Definitely.
And there are certain, I can't remember the name of them, but there are certain things that happen, like, it's like the United Council on Religions or something like that. It's a UN thing that's set up where these guys get together. You know, Pope will go and Dalai Lama. Fucking hell! Do you see that video of Dalai Lama this week?
Well, I heard
Didn't he
about
stick
it.
his tongue out for a kid to lick it?
Yikes!
Something on those lines, yeah.
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 Yeah. So yeah, dangerous ground. I think you've got to find your own path in this way. The thing is, it's quite seductive. The New Age stuff and reincarnation, these other systems are seductive.
You've got some fancy crystals.
Very seductive crystals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I go to Glastonbury a lot because there's some really good sacred sites there that are very potent, and there's tons of New Age stuff there. There's some competent people too, but there's a lot of New Age, and yeah, you get to see the ugly side of it. Absolutely.
That's like the commercial mecca of New Age, isn't it, Glastonbury?
I like Glastonbury. There's some good coffee shops.
Yeah, half of it's like you get a lot of the light and you get a lot of the dark. There is a fuck ton of power there, but it's not all good actually.
Something I wanted to ask you about, Richard, was narcissism. You mentioned it before. I don't know anything about this. Tell me what is it? Is this like a personality disorder, or is it a mode of behavior, or what is it? How do you recognize it? Can I diagnose my missus with it? What's the rules?
Yeah, so it's one of the great plagues that is infesting the whole planet at the moment and is causing untold damage. I mean, like disorder, unhappiness, disability, death, poverty. Like it, if you're going to rank it, it's one of the worst ones for that kind of stuff. So, okay,
Is it something that we all have though? Don't we all have a bit of narcissism in our psyche?
Yeah, unless you're mega enlightened. But it's like
Thank
yeah. So think about it like body fat, right? Like you could be like a Mr. Olympia guy and have like 4% body fat. So at that point, you've got basically no body fat. So if you're an extremely adept spiritual person, you have like nearly no narcissism, and then it's like a scale, and then like, you know, if you could have tons of it, in which case you're a curse to yourself and everyone around you. So, okay, so what is it? So narcissism can be defined by a complete absence of self-esteem. And self-esteem is a psycho-spiritual energy that comes to us from the highest expression of psyche. And when you got it, you're good, you feel good. There's a nourishment that comes not through the physical body, but through the inner. And it, you know, we feel okay. It doesn't matter if I've got a scruffy beard or something, or I don't say my words properly or something like that. There's an anchoring and a supporting of something which has me here, so I can just stand here and feel all right. Now, absence of that, I'm going to be in a terrible state of anxiety, which is how these narcissists are. So what they develop is a crooked and evil, specifically evil with a big E, coping strategy. What they do is, rather than try to build the self-esteem, they develop this persona, this ugly mask, where they're like, oh, I'm a good charity person, hashtag I stand with Ukraine, or whatever it is, or like you know, like, or like, I don't know, or I'm a poor person and you need to look after me, like I need your sympathy, if you're more of a covert sort of narcissist. Or, oh, I'm special, I'm the best, I'm a bodybuilder. There's nothing wrong with like bodybuilding and stuff. I used to do a lot of it. Like, there's nothing wrong with good cars, there's nothing wrong with running a business, like they're fine. But the devil's in the detail. Like the nuance here is like, these things are there where you're drawing a sense of psycho-spiritual energy, not from the actual source where you're supposed to get it from, but from a superior sense, from one of these things, or from any thousands of things that you could do it from. Spirituality, we mentioned, could be one of them too. And then it's like, oh, you don't have the good car. Oh, you're not as charitable. Oh, you're not as awake as me, and you don't know as much of the conspiracy, anything at all. And then so you have this inferior, superior thing where like you get a sense of what they call narcissistic supply, which is essentially a type of spiritual, psychological vampirism. And the given narcissist can survive spiritually for another crooked frickin' day. And a wake of horror is unleashed around them, because what they're doing is they're projecting their own unfinished business onto everyone else. The shame and the contempt and the deep inferiority that these people have, that they must stick that on everyone. They have to, like an alcoholic has to drink until they fix their problem. And then that's how they get by. That's how they make a spiritual living. If you went to Davos, you know, like where the New World Order hang out, like, it would be the most like draining experience in the world. I think just, like, everyone would be doing this, you know?
Right. That's so interesting. I would never have thought it as being a lack of self-esteem. I would have thought it was the polar opposite.
Categorically not true. And it's fragile. If you press the right button, and if you spend enough time doing it, you know where it is, you'll watch a complete collapse of their inner, and you get to see them go full demon mode.
Oh dear, that doesn't sound nice. I won't be pushing any buttons, I don't think. Richard,
so just to finish the point, because like I know a lot of audience members, I'm saying this stuff, and there's going to be penny drop moments, and they won't know, or they'll just start to realize this stuff, and a lot of them won't know they've been abused by these people. But the funny thing with narcissists, they got this, you could probably break it down to about 50 different tactics that they use for that one strategic goal of getting the superior position and avoiding the inferior position at all costs. Common ones are like gaslighting, where I'm projecting a sense of insanity to people around me, you know, like, or I'm making you question your sense of morality or like sense of rightness. They feel not right. They're the immoral ones. They're the ones that they're insane, but they can kind of project that onto other people. Or triangulation, where maybe I get like you to kind of think that, you know, this other person's a bad person, and like I get you fighting against each other. Or like a whispering campaign, or like various different types of undermining and that kind of thing. And you can tell these things are working on you because you're around someone and you feel bad, like the proof's in the pudding. You feel like you're wrong, you feel like you're no good, you have a shaky sense of self. And terribly common in our culture. Our media is extremely narcissistic. There's loads of narcissism acted out in our films and TV shows. This is why I think it was Phil was saying, get off that stuff. Well, that's one of the reasons you're not being inculcated by these shit ideas.
Yeah, I mean, most of modern media is just absolutely terrible. I mean, that was a good enough reason to give it up. I mean, like the quality of there's very much. I think the last series I watched was the Game of Thrones one, the prequel one, which I thought was pretty good, and it was only 8 episodes, something.
Yeah.
So I gave it a chance, but
there isn't much out there. There is a bit of a dearth.
No, it's cookie cutter bullshit, and it's all the messaging that does my head in. I'd rather watch someone like Gary on YouTube, break down a whole season in 20 minutes and have a good laugh at that, rather than subject myself to watching hour after hour of the fucking garbage that gets piped into people's living rooms. It's horrific.
But aside from Game of Thrones, what gems have you guys discovered?
She-Hulk. Amazing.
Ben is a big fan of She-Hulk. I mean, at the moment, I can't really think of anything that I've watched recently that was good. The last good film I can remember watching is that Nicolas Cage one I recommended to you. That's funny.
Oh yeah, that was good.
The what's it called? That one?
The Unbearable Weight
of Massive Talent. Yeah, that's quite funny because it's like he's essentially just taking the piss out of himself, essentially, on film for an hour and a half. And it's an hour and a half, not like 2 hours, 3 hours long, and it's just drawn out. And like a good example was the latest Batman film. That was like, I think, was it 3 hours? That
it was long.
3 hours, and you got to the end of it, and you still didn't know anything about the characters, and it had all finished. And there was some like good moments in that film, but it was just so poorly executed and all the rest of it. But I could go on for hours about films and things like that.
You love films, Matt.
I do, yeah. I do love films, but there's not been a lot recently that I have enjoyed, if I'm being honest. I think there's a lot of, at the moment as well, authorship, if that's the right way.
What's that mean?
I don't know. I made it up. So, like, auteur directors, so they're just given free reign because they're thought of as, unique talents or whatever. So, this might be controversial, but Martin Scorsese did The Irishman, and that's another 3 hour beast of a film. It was a good film, but it's drawn out. Like when
self-indulgent.
Yeah, a little bit. Maybe he was being narcissistic.
It's like the Harry Potter books.
Well, I was just going to say,
or the Game of Thrones books. They start off nice, short, concise, and then the authors get so powerful they can fuck all their editors off and indulge themselves in these narratives and this description. And I remember reading, I think it was the 3rd Game of Thrones books. I was like, if I have to hear one more description of a sentinel tree, I'm going to kill myself. Get on with the story. That's what I'm here for. But alas, that is the way the corporate
and I suppose that's a lot of
works.
It's all these just things get longer and longer and longer, but without any kind of
like this podcast
meat to it, basically.
Just sinew.
Richard, we've gone over an hour already. Are there any final thoughts? Obviously the links are in the show notes, as everyone knows. As always, if you want to follow up and check out Richard's website and his Odyssey channel and that. But is there anything else you want to leave us with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'll plug the Odyssey channel. So there's a live stream most Tuesdays at 8 p.m. UK time. So if you want to talk about spirituality and conspiracies and the Great Awakening and stuff, that's the place to do it. I've got a really good interview coming out as soon as we can get it published. So hopefully by tomorrow with Freddie Silver. So if you like the kind of this sort of content, I think he'll blow your mind. So that should be out on the channel by like maybe tomorrow or the day after. And yeah, like I want to say to everyone, good luck during the Great Awakening. Like this is a obscenely powerful, tense, interesting, beautiful time in history.
Should we set our alarms, Richard?
Set your alarms for the Great Awakening. Well, it's a psychological, spiritual awakening, not awakening of the body. But like I wish everyone best of luck with it,
Yeah. Good message. Good thing to end on.
Solid ending, yeah.
Yep. Cross your fingers, set your alarm. Yep. That was it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Set your alarm.
Good luck.
Don't watch the Batman.
Don't watch Batman. Yes.
Do watch. What's that show we like?
Raised by Wolves.
Yeah,
that's insane.
All right. Whatever. I'm not watching it. I'm not watching that shite. Okay, Richard. we shall wrap up. Thanks once again for joining us. And
Thank you.
yeah, stay on the line for 1 minute while we play ourselves out. We'll see you on the other side. And for those of you in YouTube land, we shall be back in 5 or 10 minutes for part 2. Do some news. Got some funny stuff.
Woohoo!
Lots of funny stuff. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Sayonara.
Bye.